Hi, in this video I want to just talk about brushes. We use the brush a lot in Photoshop, particularly when we're working on masks, but it comes up in almost any tool that we use. There's a brush option everywhere that we go, and I want to talk a little bit more about how we work with brushes, some of the shortcuts for brushes, and some of the options for brushes. Okay, so we're looking at a pretty picture now, and I'm going to come back and actually work with this with a mask. But to start, I'm actually going to just put a layer on, and I'm going to fill this layer with white because I want to just have you start by just looking at how brushes work. I've picked the brush tool. Now remember, you can go up here and grab the brush tool, and you can also just hit B if you're, for instance, on the hand tool or anywhere else. You just hit B and it will just grab the brush tool. The first thing that you want to look at, even before you start playing, is go up here and just look at all of these differences. Now, right now, we are just on the default brush. And for the time being, go ahead and leave it there. You'll find later that there's a lot of other options that you might want to play with. I'll let you kind of get into those on your own if you choose. For this course, you really are only going to need that brush to do the exercises and assignments that we have. Here, though, is a really important tool. This is where you can control the size and the hardness. Now, there's a great shortcut for size. There are some shortcuts for hardness, which I won't show you just yet. They're a little bit more complicated. So these are the two things, though, that you're going to be playing with a lot. So notice that if I change the size, it goes up in pixels, and it can get very, very large or very, very tiny. And that's really important. I'll go ahead, and we're on black right now, so I'll go ahead and just show you the difference. That's the smallest brush. And of course, if we go somewhere here, that's a bigger brush. Now, the other thing you notice, especially with the larger brush, is that this brush is very, very soft. And that's because we have it on 0% hardness. If I bring it up to 100% hardness and do that same one, you see that it has this very hard edge. The size and the hardness of the edges are really, really crucial to what you're doing. There's going to be times when you want to have a very, very soft edge, and there's going to be other times where you want just a tiny bit of softness to the edge, and there are other times where you're going to want it absolutely hard. So before you get started doing anything with your brush tool, you want to come up here and just check all of these settings and see what's going on. I'm going to go ahead and leave it about there for now, maybe a little bit larger, and I'm going to put the hardness right in the middle. So we're just going to work with this brush for a little while, just to play with some other things here. So the mode right now is at normal, and I want you to leave it there. When we get to blending modes, this is one of the many areas where blending modes show up. They show up all over Photoshop. And I know that a handful of you are already playing with these. For those of you who aren't, just hang on, we're going to get there. And for those of you who are playing, I'm going to give you some more information about blending tools, so hopefully you can use them even more deliberately. Another very important area are opacity and flow. And by the way, I use them enough that I have to remind myself to double check before I get started and make sure that these are where I want, because they will stay wherever you put them last. Now, opacity probably makes sense to you right now. I'm on black, I'm at 100% opacity, and so of course it paints a solid black line. If I drop the opacity down to 50%, it's going to paint a gray line. It's about a 50% gray. So as long as I keep this down, notice that if I just keep painting, and even if I paint like over, it's going to maintain this even gray tone. If I stop and I start again, it's going to add it on. So it's going to continue to build up that layer, and that would keep on happening depending on the density of the gray until you had a black. Okay, let's actually turn the opacity back to 100%. There we go. And turn the flow down so you can see how differently that would work. So the opacity is at 100%, but the flow is low. Now initially, it just looks like, oh, well, it's changing the way that it's changing the opacity. But notice that I'm not lifting my brush up. And unlike if I'm on a 100% opacity, it is actually continuing to make this denser. So we can even change opacity and flow. So remember, opacity, if I go over the top of it, it just stays the same. Flow, though, by the way, I want to point out, if I take flow and opacity down, and I'm running out of space, then flow starts even softer, and it will start to gather up density, but it will never get denser than the maximum density of the opacity. Whew. I hope that makes sense. Again, leave flow alone if it feels like it's a little bit baffling, but sometime in your future, I guarantee you it's probably going to become very, very useful.